All right, here we are. Okay, so we are live and we are going to start this review, but I need to know if people are here. I have a different chat window and I'm not sure if you guys can see it or not. So if I have students online right now, what I need you to do is I need you to either text in the chat message box to let me know you're here, or if the chat message box is not available, what I need you to do is basically send me a quick text on Remind and let me know that it's up and running. Because like I told you guys in class, this is a new format that I'm going to try tonight. I'm just doing straight YouTube live and I'm not getting into, you know, the different broadcast, you know, OBS stuff and everything like that. So if you are live right now with me and you can hear me, go ahead and put something in the chat box or send me a Remind message so I know what's going on. And I'm going to wait a few minutes. I think I had music going, but I don't think you could hear it before. All right. It's working. All right, cool. Bella, thank you. Okay, is everybody here? Okay, stop sending me reminds. Okay, people are getting through to me, which is awesome. Now, what I want to know is, do you guys have a, yeah, okay, I got you. You guys are all here. I should always just designate one person. Do you guys have a chat box on your window that you can type in? Yes or no? Do you have a chat box you can type in online? Well, see, now no one's answering. We'll see. We're going to go through this. Hopefully, what's going to happen is I'm hoping this records. And if it doesn't record, I'm so sorry for everybody who's going to watch later. But cool, Alana, thank you for the answer. All right, so we're going to get started. Now, listen, tomorrow's test is basically covering 1898 through the 1920s. We're looking at imperialism. We are looking at imperialism. We're looking at the World War I, and we're looking at the 1920s. All right, so a couple people don't have a chat box. So Alana, you told me you have one. Jacob, you said you don't. I can work with either one, because if you don't have a chat box, you can always send me questions via Remind. So for my students, if who are watching, if you don't have a chat box and you can't send anything, send it to me via Remind, and then I can answer your questions that way. If you do have a chat box, use that. If you're not my student, I'm sorry, I can't answer your questions unless you have a friend you can text and they can text me, and we'll just get through this one at a time. So do the best we can. The information will be there and we'll be good to go. All right? Okay, so here we go. Like I said, imperialism, World War I, and the 1920s. And so what I'm going to pull up my one of my screens here and see how this works, because like I said, I'm doing all sorts of new stuff and this is always going to be fun. That's not what I wanted. Here we go. Set this up. Good to go. Play from current slide. Now watch this. Come over here, screen share. Hold tight, it's coming. And there we go. All right. So you guys should be able to see my screen now that shows the it shows the Platt Amendment, everything we're going to start talking about here in 1898. 1898 is a key year. We talked about this a lot in class, how it's a turning point year for the United States. Leading up to this point, we've been into the Gilded Age. We've been basically an isolated country. We've been following the lead of Washington and Jefferson when they said to stay out of foreign entanglements. But that all is going to change in 1898, and it's really going to change with Cuba, and we're going to see some involvement down in Cuba. We know the Spanish is holding Cuba right now. We have tried to buy Cuba before. We can go all the way back to the Ostend Manifesto, and the Ostend Manifesto is when we tried to purchase Cuba from the Spanish. That didn't work. We were trying to get another slave state, but Cuba has always been kind of that temptress for us, something we wanted for our own, benefit and stuff like that. And having the Spanish over here, now they kind of came in before the Monroe Doctrine was issued, so they came in, kind of got grandfathered into the whole Monroe Doctrine. But now that they're here, a lot of people are saying we want them out, or we want that land, and how can we do it? And really, we didn't have any rights to go in and get Cuba until we started hearing about the mistreatment of the Cuban people. And we heard about how the Cubans had launched their own revolution for independence, and that revolution was thwarted by the Spanish. And then they're going to bring a man by the name of General Weyler in, who's going to wreak, torture and mistreatment and starvation, cutting off their food supply. And when that happens, our press picks it up. And they're going to use a system called yellow journalism. And through yellow journalism, they're going to present a story to the American people, propagandized almost to get to the goal they want. And that's for the United States to go into Cuba and get it. I think it was the two main guys with yellow journalism was Pulitzer and Randolph Hearst. And one of them had told a photographer at the time, man, you go down to Cuba and you get me some pictures and I'll make a war out of that. And so their goal was to get the United States involved in war with Spain over Cuba. Now, initially, we didn't want to get involved. Initially, we wanted to stay out of it. We wanted to stick to our normal way of staying isolated, staying out of entanglements. But we do have foreign interest down in Cuba. We do have businesses down there. And that's kind of what's been happening through the 1890s, is we've seen businesses and such moving into the Latin American area, setting up businesses, investing in that way, and all of that has to do with nothing more than just making money. And we wanted to expand our markets, because the United States, our large growth of industry and stuff had led to our markets just being saturated, and we needed new places to sell our goods. And so we looked down to Latin America. And when we get down there, you see businesses like the U.S. Fruit Company and stuff going down. And so what we then have to do in order to protect our business interests is we have to use our military to protect what we have going on down there. And that's what people expect for us to do. And so our military has already started moving into the Latin American region. And now these problems with Cuba comes up. And you have Spain down there. You have American interest down there. And so what the president does is he's going to send a ship down into Cuba, into Havana Harbor. And the whole purpose of sending down that ship is going to be to show a sign of force, to let the Spanish know, hey, we're here, we're hanging out, and we're going to protect our interest in this area, because, that's, we don't want you messing with the Americans who are in Cuba. And to kind of protect what we were doing down there, we are going to issue what's known as the Teller Amendment. Now, the Teller Amendment is where Congress and the president says, we don't want Cuba. We're just there to help if needed. It's kind of like a proclamation that we're not trying to come in and imperialize your island there. Well, the ship we sent down is the Maine. And the Maine is going to go down into Havana Harbor. And one thing leads to another, and the Maine explodes. It sinks, and something like 328 men are killed. Well, the yellow journalists are going to fly with this one, and they're going to present this picture like the Spanish sunk our ship. Now, they never committed fully to that because we never had any proof of what happened. But they would do things like sources say, or an anonymous tip from the White House says that it was the Spanish who did it. And this is going to create a huge backlash and a huge calling from the American people to say, hey, we need to go to war. We need to go settle the score. And so we do declare war against Spain. And that's where we attach that Teller Amendment. We're like, hey, we're coming down to get you. Hey, you're not going to sink our ships, blah, blah, blah. But we don't want Cuba. Kind of. And we are going to go to war with Spain, and that's going to be the Spanish-American War. And let's be honest, this wasn't much of a war. This was more of just a trouncing. And we went down and we trounced Spain and Cuba. This war lasted like 6 weeks, like 100 days or something like that. And Spain is going to basically, they're going to my gosh, surrender. We're going to sign the treaty with them. And from that treaty, we're going to get other territories. We're going to get Guam. We're going to get Puerto Rico. We're going to get the Philippines. Now, what was interesting about the Philippines is we really didn't want it. However, when we found out that Germany did, that's when we said, okay, give us the Philippines. Now, when we talk about Guam and we talk about Puerto Rico, especially Puerto Rico, we're going to make Puerto Rico a territory of the United States. We're going to do that about the same time that we make Alaska and Hawaii territories. And so that's the imperialism of the United States. We are moving out beyond our borders. Let me point out, though, right now, we're not moving towards Europe at all. We're actually moving away from Europe because we still have that idea that we don't want to get involved in the drama of Europe. So you're going to see us moving more west as we imperialize versus east. Now, with Cuba, we're not going to grant them their independence quite yet. Now, remember, we supported their revolution. We supported their fight for independence, but we're not quite sure these poor people are ready to govern themselves. So we're going to make, under the Platt Amendment, we're going to make Cuba a protectorate. And what that means is Cuba's going to have its own government, but they're going to have the United States as big brother kind of looking out for them. And we're going to have some very specific terms to this protectorate under the Platt Amendment. Number one, they can't make any treaties without U.S. approval. Number two, if there's any problems in Cuba, we reserve the right to intervene if we think that it's going to hurt our interests there. And finally, which still exists today, we got a perpetual lease for Guantanamo Bay, which still exists today. That's where we house terrorists. It's a naval base down there. So that's something that's still going on. This is going to cause a lot of strife in Cuba. There's going to be a lot of people who aren't too happy with the United States at this point. But that's our role that we're going to play in Cuba. And we're doing this under the Monroe Doctrine. We're saying this is part of the Monroe Doctrine and us protecting our interest in the Western Hemisphere. Now, the Philippines, there's a little bit of a different scenario. Like I said, we didn't want it. But under the terms of the white man's burden, and that's a term you should know for this exam is white man's burden, we definitely didn't feel like they could govern themselves. And so we're going to go in and we're going to run the Philippines. We're not going to make them a protectorate like we did with Cuba. We're not going to make them a territory like we did with Puerto Rico or Alaska or Hawaii. They're going to be under the rule of the U.S. government, and you're going to have an outcry. You're going to have a revolt against that, and that's going to be led by Emilio Aguinaldo. And Aguinaldo is going to come in and he's going to lead rebels against the United States. And we are actually at war in the Philippines for several years. And with what's interesting is with the war in the Philippines, America is going to resort to the same things that we complained about General Weiler doing in Cuba. We're going to start torturing. We're going to start, there's going to be episodes of rape. There's going to be episodes of starvation, all to put down this revolt. And it's amazing how Americans love fights for independence until it's the fight against us. And that's kind of what happened. Now, McKinley is president at the time. And McKinley is going to send William Howard Taft down to the Philippines to act as their governor. Now, when Taft goes in there, he's going to do work to help them start, basically, I guess, would you say, train them to start governing themselves. We capture Aguinaldo. We convince them to stop fighting against us. Taft is going to start putting in a system of infrastructure as roads and bridges, like we've seen, here in America. He is going to include the Filipino culture in their local government to get them more involved. And eventually, the Philippines were going to grant them their independence. I believe it's 1946 that we grant them their independence. I know it's July 4th. I want to say July 4th, 1946, that we grant the Philippines their full independence. But that's kind of what's going on with imperialism. What you really need to understand about imperialism is America was seeking new territories and new markets for our economy. We didn't, we, like I said, we had saturated our economy here, and now we want to go someplace else. And Latin America is going to provide us a lot of new markets, and then another one that's going to provide us markets is going to be China. But let me backtrack a little bit, talk a little bit about the Spanish-American War. We did have one hero come out of the Spanish-American War, and that's going to be Teddy Roosevelt. He was actually the Assistant Secretary of War under McKinley. He's going to resign that when we go to war, and he is actually going to lead his famous Rough Riders up San Juan Hill in that battle. And so that's going to cement his I guess, his legacy in military history, which will also help him become the running mate of McKinley in 1900 when McKinley runs for re-election, and he's going to tab Teddy Roosevelt as his vice presidential candidate. When we talk more about imperialism, like I said, a lot of people look at imperialism as the United States forcing its influence into foreign countries. What the United States said is we're making these countries better. We're improving them. We're teaching them how to govern themselves. They're making money. Different, you can see the cartoon there on the left. We showed that in class, and the effect we had in some of these different countries. The next place we end up going is going to be over further east, or not further east, further west to the Far East. We want to go in China. Now, we talked a lot in class about the spheres of influence in China and what that was all about. And we were a little bit concerned when we went to China because it seemed like all the good stuff was gone, if you know what I mean. We know that other European countries are already there. We know that Russia's there, France is there, England is there, Japan is there. And they'd kind of divvied up China, and we didn't have a say in it. And so we're going to go over there, and we're going to have a little bit of a challenge on our hands. And this is when John Hay, who was the Secretary of State, is going to introduce the open door policy in Japan. Now, the open door policy is basically when John Hay is going to send notice to all the other imperializing countries in Japan and say, this is what we're going to do. We're just going to open the door for anybody who is interested to come and trade in Japan, or I'm sorry, in China. And we're not going to have spheres of influence anymore. We're not going to have, the territories or the regions that you have control right now. We're all just going to be able to come in and do our own thing. That was all well and good, but as we talked about in class, no country in their right mind is going to say, oh, okay, yeah, we're going to share our wealth with another country. And that's basically what John Hay said we're going to do. But what's interesting is none of these countries responded. None of these countries said no. And, so John Hay took that as a yes. He goes, well, they didn't say no, they must mean yes. So here come the United States. And we start to impose into their spheres of influence, and all of a sudden now the United States is a key player over in China. So once again, we're moving further away from Europe into the Far East, but again, what we're looking for is new markets. It's all about bringing new markets in and making more money for the United States. That 1898 is what spurred all this on. 1898 is when America, I said it was a turning point because with the Spanish-American War, with our activities in imperialism and everything like that, this is when we became a world power. This is when we became a player on the world stage. So 1898, other things that came out in 1898, that's when oh my gosh, I can't even think of all this stuff. We had been, Mahan's sea power, influence of sea power, that had been written in the early 1890s, but that's influencing the building up of our Navy. The Spanish-American War happened in 1898. Just so many things happened, so make sure you're just familiar with those years and the big events that occurred during that time. When we go further, after we leave 1898, that's going to take us right into the progressive era. And going into the progressive era, what we're going to look at is we're going to look at three different presidents who have three different viewpoints on how we should work within the world stage, what type of foreign diplomacy we should have. From the left to right, you have TR, you have William Taft, and you have Woodrow Wilson, two Republicans and a Democrat. Now, each one of these men are going to have to come up with a foreign policy, something we've never actually had in this country. We've never needed a foreign policy because we've never gotten involved in foreign politics, but now we are. And the three different policies they come up with is Teddy Roosevelt will have his big stick diplomacy, which is based on the military. He's going to use the military to engage in the military to protect our interests. You have dollar diplomacy, in which William Howard Taft is going to introduce economics to advance our goals within our imperialistic countries. And finally, you're going to have moral diplomacy from Woodrow Wilson, which is going to be more about spreading democracy in the world. And while each one of these guys has their own diplomacy and their own approach to foreign policy, their goals are all the same. And that's to advance the American economics, to build our economy, to make us stronger that way. You know, they all are playing with different cards, but they all are holding the same hand. They want to do the same things. Now, let's talk a little bit about TR. TR is probably one of my favorite presidents to study. He was the 26th president of the United States. He is going to become president following the assassination of William McKinley. So you guys remember, just a quick review, McKinley was murdered by an anarchist who was upset about our activities with our, in foreign countries. And he'll be killed in Buffalo, New York at the Pan American Exposition. He'll be shot in the stomach when, why can't I ever remember his name? Chodovs, or what's his name? I can't remember, Leon. When Leon went up to shoot him, remember, he had his hand wrapped in a napkin, and in doing that, he was able to hold the gun, and when McKinley reached out to shake his hand, he was shot and killed. TR is going to become the president. And just a reminder, McKinley elected in 1900. Another president dies who was elected in a 0 year, which means Tecumseh's curse is alive and well. TR is going to come in, and he is going to basically look at what he has to do differently to protect what we have going on down there in Latin America. So let's just take a look at that. His policy is called big stick diplomacy. Now, remember, he wants to use the military in order to advance the American goals and stuff like that. He is the youngest president we've ever had. We talked about in the Gilded Age with domestic policy, he was the trust buster, he was a conservationist, and, his domestic policy was quite successful. When we look at his foreign policy, the big stick policy is basically, like I said, he's going to use the military. He believed what Mahan said, that strong navies make strong countries. So he's going to start building up our Navy during his presidency. He looks at the possibilities of what we can do to better make our navies more efficient and stronger. And one thing that was discovered during the Spanish-American War was the fact that our navies couldn't quickly get from one side of the world to the other. Excuse me. If we had to get our Pacific fleet over to the Atlantic quickly, we couldn't do it because South America was in the way. So one thing TR looked to do was build a canal through Panama. He wanted to go through Panama because that would have been the shortest route. That would open up the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean Sea to the Pacific Ocean. Unfortunately, Panama was under control of Colombia, and Colombia was not prepared to let us lease the land, which was interesting because as soon as they said no, the Panamanians are going to launch an independence revolt against Colombia. Now, a lot of people believe, and they're probably right, that TR encouraged the Panamanians to do that, promising our backing. And in a sense, we did back the Panamanian independence fighters because we're going to send our Navy down off the coast of Panama and Colombia, just to let them know we're there. And so when Panama gains its independence, it does grant the United States a lease where I think we paid them $250,000. No, wait. what did we pay? We paid him like $500,000 for the land and then like $250,000 a year for a lease or something. But basically, we gave them upfront money and then we're going to lease the land from them, in perpetuity until we actually give the canal back to them in 1999, thanks to an agreement made by Jimmy Carter. The Panama Canal is going to be built. The other thing that's going to be built is the U.S. Navy, and what TR wants to show is he wants a show of military strength. And so what he's going to do is he is going to introduce the Great White Fleet to the world. The Great White Fleet is a huge naval fleet that was basically, these are obsolete ships. They don't have any firepower. They're not like the dreadnoughts that are being created right now. And so, but he's going to paint them up white. He's going to send them around the world, and it's going to be a show of force. They're going to do they're going to circumnavigate the world, and America is going to look like this strong naval force. And so that's what he's going to introduce during his presidency. Now, he's also, I'm going to skip over this because this was our last test, but these are some of his domestic policies that we talked about. Going into the 1910s, we're going to have a new, I skipped, I'm missing a slide here, so you guys get to see my face. Here we go. During the next presidency, we're talking William Howard Taft. William Howard Taft is going to come in and introduce dollar diplomacy. And what he believed was that private Americans should start investing their funds into Latin America. You're going to see private American banks start buying out the debt that was owed by these Latin American countries. And one thing I should point out, I totally forgot to mention the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. This was Teddy Roosevelt's way of saying, not only are Europeans not welcome over here as far as colonization, the United States is taking on the role as the police officer and the protector of the Western Hemisphere. And we told European countries in no uncertain terms that if you're going to come over here and you're going to basically threaten any Latin American countries, we are going to take on the role of protector. We're not going to let you do that. On top of that, if you have a problem with any Latin American country, you need to come through the United States. He passed the Roosevelt corollary when Venezuela found itself in hock to England and Germany. They owed him a lot of money. And when they weren't able to pay it, Germany and England were threatening to invade Venezuela and try to get basically a pound of flesh for the money that was owed to them. The United States stepped in and said, no, that's not going to happen. We issued the Roosevelt corollary. We dealt with England and Germany. We assumed the debt of Venezuela, and basically now Venezuela owes us money. So the Roosevelt corollary tells all the rest of the world that we are protecting Latin America as our own. On top of that, we also told Latin America, get your butts in order. You start doing things the right way. Don't put us in the position where we're going to have to step in and negotiate or take care of problems for you. Now that takes me back to dollar diplomacy with William Howard Taft. A lot of the Latin American countries owed European countries money. So what we saw was private banks from America buying out those loans. Now those Latin American countries owe us money. And there's a little bit of a financial guarantee in there because with them owing us money, it's almost like they kind of owe us for other things too. So that's going to open the door for more American investments with business and stuff down in Latin America. So what Taft is trying to do is build the American commerce through private investment, and pretty successful at that. And things are going well. Now, we talked about this before, TR wasn't really happy with Taft and the job he was doing, which will lead to the election of 1912. And that's when you're going to have Taft and TR split the Republican vote, because TR is going to introduce the Bull Moose Party. And so he's going to come in and basically Woodrow Wilson will come in and win that election because Taft and TR is going to split the ticket. So that's going to introduce our next president, which is going to be Woodrow Wilson. Now, Woodrow Wilson's a Democrat. He also is going to have a Democratic Congress. Wilson's foreign policy is known as, he's got a lot of stuff going on. It's known as moral diplomacy. What he's going to look at is basically, I'm going to go back to his picture. He wants to spread democracy. He wants to spread the American idea through the Latin American stuff. What's interesting about Woodrow Wilson, he had no foreign policy experience whatsoever. Woodrow Wilson he said, domestic policy I'm great at. He goes, but wouldn't it be ironic if this presidency had to deal with foreign policy? And as we know, just based on what we studied the last few weeks, that's all he studied was basically, or that's all he dealt with was foreign policy. And I mean, he had to deal with it not only in Latin American places, but now he's going to have to deal with it in Europe, because just a year and a half after or actually a year after he takes office, World War I is going to start. And now he's going to try to keep us out of the war for a while. That's going to be his goal, but it's going to be very difficult for him to do that. Now, when we talk about World War I, I'm going to pull up a different slideshow here. If you just give me just a second here. When we talk about World War I, there's a couple of things you need to remember. You need to remember, number one, the main reasons that we went to war, or actually the main reasons the war started. When we talk about, let me show you here. When we talk about main, the causes of World War I, these are the European causes for this war. So you had militarism, you had alliances, you had imperialism, and you had nationalism. And we talked in class about how I really felt that nationalism and the alliances are really the key reasons behind World War I starting. We know prior to the war started that we did have an arms race going on, an Anglo-German arms race going on between Germany and England. And so what that's going to do is you're going to see this race, and a lot of it's going to have to do with ships and stuff like that. And so that's part of the militarism. But the alliances and the nationalism that European countries are going to be trying to implement, I think that's a bigger cause of this war. And the war is going to go on, and there's not a lot really to talk about with regards to the war. What you should be familiar with really is know the main reasons that Europe entered the war. Know that really it was fighting to a stalemate until the Battle of the Somme, and we talked about that in class and how dreadful and how it was deadly that was. Millions of lives. In the past where we've been doing thousands of lives. But it's going to be a while, and America's going to stay out of it for a while. America's role in World War I for the first half of it is we're giving loans to the Allies and the Central Powers, and mostly to the Allies though, and we're also providing supplies and weapons. But we are going to get pulled into this war, and there's going to be several reasons that we get pulled into this war, and I'm going to pull that up, and I want to show that to you. Let me get to that over here. We went through all the alliances and everything, and that's all interesting and stuff, but let me get to here. Hang on. I could show you the baseball battle again, but we got to keep going. All right, this is what I wanted to pull up first, because one of the big things that Wilson had to deal with was divided loyalties in our country. You had, because of the new wave of immigrants coming into our country, because of all these people coming in, we have divided loyalties in our country at this point. We have the those who are supportive of the Allies, and that's our native-born Americans. These are your Western Europeans, your Greeks, your Russians. They're supporting the Allies, but we have a lot of people who've come from Germany. We've had a lot of people who've come from Austria and that's the Slavic regions of Europe, and so they're supporting that side. So Wilson had to deal with these divided loyalties in our country, and what was the best way? And honestly, in the beginning, the best way for him to deal with it was staying out of it, staying just completely out of this war. But as we know, we're going to get pulled out. We've been told to stay out of European entanglements. Washington told us that, but we have but we're missing out. And I talked about in my class that we had a lot of young men who wanted to go fight in this war. However, we're not going to join. So they actually go and join like they join England, they join France and fight with them. But how did the United States get into this war? And this is what I want to share you. We did the Dora clap, clap, clap in class. And here are the 3 reasons that the United States entered World War I. Number 1, it was the sinking of the Lusitania. Number 2, it was the Zimmerman telegram. And number 3, it was unrestricted warfare with the U-boats or the submarines from Germany. Those are the 3 reasons that we went to war. And so when the Lusitania sunk, Germany made, their German subs sunk that cruise ship, and Germany claimed, well, hey, we warned you. We put those ads in the paper. We told you we were going to blow that ship out of the water, but your Americans got on it anyway. We kind of took the apology. We accepted Germany's apology. They issued the Sussex Pledge saying we're not going to use unrestricted warfare anymore. The next thing that we know, though, is that they are using unrestricted warfare. And then what happens is England is going to intercept the Zimmermann telegram. And the Zimmermann telegram kind of occurs in about 1917. Now, to understand the significance of the Zimmermann telegram and why Germany sent that, you have to understand what's going on in the war at this point. This is about 1917. So this is when the Russian Revolution starts up, the Bolshevik Revolution. And that Bolshevik Revolution leads Russia to leave the war. And now Germany only has to fight on a single front. They were fighting on the Eastern Front against Russia and the Western Front against France and England and other countries. Well, now Russia's out, so they can focus on the Western Front. And with that, the last thing they need is America to come into this war and join the Allied powers. And they know America is ticked off at them because of the submarine warfare. So what they do is they reach out to Mexico. And that's what the Zimmermann telegram was all about. They reach out to Mexico saying, here's the deal. We will give you financial backing. We will back you if you engage in, aggressive actions towards the United States. And here's the kicker. If you're successful and when we win this war and you're our ally, you're going to get Texas back, you're going to get New Mexico back, you're going to get Arizona back, all that land that happened in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the best treaty in the world. When all that fails, we're going to give it all back to you. This probably could have been the dumbest tactical move by Germany they could have made. They had no idea how Mexico would respond. And really, in all honesty, Mexico was not in the position to respond really at this point. Fortunately, the note never got to Mexico. Of course, they might have ripped it up. What happened was England intercepted it. They told us, and we're like, whoa, that tells us right there that the Sussex Pledge meant nothing, because the very first line of the Zimmermann telegram is, hey, we're going to start using unrestricted submarine warfare again. And so it is at this point that Wilson goes and asks Congress for a declaration of war. And we're going to enter the war. Now, keep in mind, we are not prepared to enter the war. We don't have the military ready to go. We don't have, really anything ready to go at this point. So while we declare war in early 1918, it's late 1917. We're not going to actually send troops over until 1918. So like the way I've explained it time and time again, we entered the war in the fourth quarter at the 2-minute warning. But when we get there, John J. Pershing is going to take the expeditionary force. He's going to go over and we'll fight, and we're going to bring the war to an end. Now the war is going to end with the Treaty of Versailles. We talked about the Treaty of Versailles in class. And the Treaty of Versailles, I don't know if I have it here on another PowerPoint or not that's ready to pull up. But basically what the Treaty of Versailles did was it basically told Germany, you're the loser, now you have to pay. And I'll show you the map here. I'm going to pull this up and let you guys see it, because it's worth noting that Germany lost a lot in the Treaty of Versailles. They gave up a lot of land. They gave up a lot of money. They had to pay war reparations to Great Britain and France and to all the allies in Europe because their countries were destroyed. They lost all their colonies. That was a big one that I think caught a lot of people off guard, is that Germany did lose all their colonies as a result of the Treaty of Versailles. And this is not working, so I'm just going to get out of it. Let me get back to this. Sorry, guys. Whoa, computer's not working. Let's go back over here. Don't you love technology? Pull this down. There we go. Okay. With the Treaty of Versailles, what Wilson's going to introduce is what's called his 14 points. And the 14 points basically address a lot of the issues that we had to deal with leading up to the war. The big idea behind the 14 points is freedom of the seas. we want, we weren't treated as a neutral partner during the first part of World War One, and Wilson honestly expected that we would be. When that doesn't happen, he's going to introduce his 14 points. Europe is going to approved the Treaty of Versailles with the 14 points. And of course, it was also approved with Article 231. Article 231 is that article that called for Germany to be absolutely punished for their actions in the war. And, we talked about this. Germany wasn't even the country that started the war yet. They're the one who's going to pay the price. So anyway, he's going to present that to Congress. The problem that Wilson has with the Treaty of Versailles and getting Congress to ratify it is the fact that he has a Republican-led Congress, and he didn't ask for any advice or consent from them when he went to negotiate the treaty. Just as a reminder, it's Article 2, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution that says the president has the power to negotiate treaties with the advice and consent of Congress, of the Senate, basically. And he did not do that. He went over to Europe alone. When he comes back, he tries to sell this. And what scares most of the American senators is the fact that the League of Nations is the 14th point in the 14 points of Wilson. And what we worried about was foreign entanglements. Coming out of this war, most Americans just wanted to go back to the way it was. And a possible alliance with a League of Nations would mean a lot of alliances with a lot of countries. And since alliances were one of the key reasons that World War I started, the last thing we wanted to do is be involved in anything like that. So Congress, or the Senate, is actually going to refuse to ratify the Treaty of Versailles. We don't sign it. We don't enter the League of Nations, even though Wilson goes on a nationwide tour trying to sell it. He suffers a stroke while he's on that tour. So this will be his last term. And it's a bit of not even a bit, it's a big embarrassment for Wilson that his baby, his creation, the League of Nations, doesn't even have his home country as a member. So that kind of brings us into the end of World War I, and it's going to lead us into the 1920s. A lot of times you can synthesize World War I to the Civil War. I'm just throwing this in there because I have the slide. I forgot I had it. But basically, the brutality of both, the new technology of both of these. We talked in our class how World War I started with horses, fighting on horseback and everything. By the end, we have tanks and large cannons and machine guns that can just plow people down. So there's a lot of things in common between these two wars. So I'm going to pause for a minute because I want to see if anybody has any questions. I need to pull up another PowerPoint that I want to use as we go through this. So just if you have anything, just let me know, and I will be happy to answer your questions. Again, if you don't have a chat box, please feel free to send me a question on Remind. Let me get over to this. Can I close this? Let me get back. Oh, my goodness. We got a mess here. Go back over here. So I don't see any questions coming up. Hopefully, I'm still live, and I'm not just talking to air. So... okay, let me close a couple of these windows here because it's getting a little bit out of control. Close this one. Let me close this one. Just giving you guys a few minutes if you have any questions for me, and then we'll press on. Minimize that. And we'll close this one. All right, cool. All right, we're good? Okay, let me pull this one up. There it is. All right. All right, here we go. No questions, so here we go. Let me pull up my screen here. We're going to talk about the 1920s. And if you remember correctly, Warren G. Harding is going to run for president in 1920, and he is going to run on this idea. He's going to return the United States to normal. We're going to go a return to normalcy. And what you have to remember is with this return to normalcy, what does that actually mean? Because a lot of people want to think, it's about returning to the time period right before World War I, but that's not actually the case. We're actually returning to a time period before 1900. We're going back to about 1898 to the time period of the Gilded Age, when we weren't involved in foreign entanglements and stuff like that. And so what we're going to find, though, is as our attempt to return to normalcy is anything but normal. So I'm going to talk first about the culture, and then I'm going to get to the foreign policy, because there's this myth that America returned to isolationism during the 1920s, which we really didn't. We actually were more just practiced neutrality during the 1920s. But with regards to culture, you're going to see like I said, the cultural changes in the 1920s is extreme. And we talked about this the last 2 days in class. The picture I have up here right now is reminiscent of the Harlem Renaissance, which we just talked about today. And we talked about the great migration of African Americans moving north into cities. And one of the effects of the great migration is going to be the Harlem Renaissance. And under the Harlem Renaissance, we're going to meet people like Langston Hughes and Billie Holiday and Duke Ellington and all these people. And we're going to be introduced to jazz and art and writing. And, so this was a great time, for African Americans to step up and basically show off who they were. It was the first time really they've been able to do that. And so that's the best part about the Harlem Renaissance was the fact that a voice is finally coming out for African Americans. Now, they're still facing a lot of racism. They're still facing segregation. They're still facing, a lot of challenges. But for one of the first times in history, they do have a voice. The 1920s are going to be highlighted by the fact that we are under prohibition. The 18th Amendment is going to be passed that makes it illegal to buy or sell or manufacture alcohol. That's going to be followed up by the Volstead Act, which is going to put enforcement power into the hands of law enforcement. But like we talked about today, even though American people voted for this amendment, they sure found a lot of different ways to get around it, whether it was with speakeasies or buying alcohol in the black market, using it through organized crime, or just making their own alcohol like moonshine and stuff like that. So that's a key vote or a key amendment during this time. During the 1920s, we saw a little bit of a transportation revolution. Cars became a passion of America. Now, Henry Ford didn't invent the car, but he invented a faster way to make them. And so, you start seeing a lot of Americans buying cars and beginning this love affair with cars. That's on the bottom left there. That's Lindbergh, and he's actually going to be the first man to fly across the ocean unassisted. Well, he's going to have a plane, but so he's not going to do it completely alone. So that's going to be a major thing. One of the biggest things we talked about in the 1920s is going to be what we call the first Red Scare. Now, this is going to go back to the Russian Revolution in 1917. And the Russian Revolution, what that showed a lot of Americans was that there is a possibility of a revolution here. A lot of Americans equated the Russian labor unions and their ability to strike, and that those strikes leading to violence and riots, and the riots leading to an overthrow and murder of the government in place. We said, man, if that could happen there, it could happen here. And we talked about how we've had strikes. We've had stuff like the Homestead strike or the Pullman strike or oh my gosh, I'm just drawing a blank on stuff tonight. You know what I'm talking about, but we talk about how our strikes became violent. The Haymarket Square, that was what I was thinking about, and how the military had to get involved in different strikes and everything. And we're like, man, if we've gone that far with our labor unions, there's a real possibility that we can take that final step and go into anarchy and chaos, which is what happened in the Soviet Union. And so this Red Scare was all about this fear of communism and socialism moving into our country and anarchy taking over. We targeted the unions. A lot of Americans had very negative feelings towards the unions because they believed they were the root of anarchy in our country. We did have anarchists coming in. There was a situation where bombs were being sent through the mail at targeting American government officials. And those bombs, with the intent of killing those officials. I think there's a total of 20 bombs that were sent via the mail to different officials. One of those officials who received a bomb was A. Mitchell Palmer. Palmer was the Attorney General of the United States, and with the help of the Justice Department, they're going to start shutting down a lot of Eastern European socialists and stuff like that. Trini, I got your question. I'll answer it in just a second. So basically, with John or Mitchell Palmer, we're going to have what's called the Palmer raids, and what that's going to be is going to be the raids of justice officials going into clubhouses, going into adult education centers, going into union halls, and basically arresting people based on their ethnicity, based on their nationality, and based on their beliefs. They weren't necessarily arresting people based on any actions. And so what we see is a stripping away of American rights, that right to due process, that right to be, you can't be arrested without being charged with a crime. But what we're doing is we start targeting certain immigrant groups, all in the name of protecting ourselves from the spread of communism in our country. And we're going to see thousands arrested. We're going to see hundreds deported by the Palmer raids. One thing I'm going to backtrack just a little bit, because when we talk about giving up our freedoms, Americans under the precipice of fear are more inclined to give up freedoms that they normally wouldn't. For instance, during World War I, the Espionage and Sedition Acts were passed, which literally took away some freedom of speech from Americans. And the court case Schenck versus the United States affirmed the right of the government to do things. When Americans are in danger, you can use that as cause to take away some of their rights. And the example they used was, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater because that's going to put Americans in danger. So you take away that freedom of speech to be able to do something like that. But when we get to the Palmer raids, you see kind of the same things starting to happen. You see American rights and freedoms being taken away, and basically, just Americans sitting by saying it's okay because we are afraid of communism. So the Red Scare is going to kind of guide us into the 1920s, and that fear is going to continue for a while. If you want to compare it to something, synthesis down the line, compare the 1920s Red Scare to the 1950s Red Scare. Compare the Palmer raids to McCarthyism, because they're pretty much the same idea. We're taking away American rights in order to protect Americans. So that's what's going on during this time. A major trial that occurred during this because of the Red Scare is the trial of Sacco and Vanzetti. Sacco and Vanzetti were Italian immigrants. They were anarchists. They were tied to different anarchy groups and stuff, but they hadn't really committed a crime. Yet they were charged with burglary and murder. And due to their nationality and stuff, a lot of people believed they were railroaded and they were not given a fair trial. And that's going to result in their execution. So you can almost see how far we're willing to go in the name of fear. And so that was a kind of a blight on the America during the 1920s. Another thing that we did in order to prevent more immigrants from coming in and causing trouble is we passed two key immigration laws. We passed the Emergency Quota Act of 1921 and the National Origins Act of 1924. The Emergency Quota Act, basically what it did was it put a cap on immigration at 3%. 3% of the population of 1910. And the idea behind that was they're going to look at every nationality in our country, and based on that nationality, 3% of that number will be allowed to immigrate into our country. Well, what they discovered quickly was 1910 is not going to stop the immigrants coming in from Eastern and Southern Europe. So that's when they're going to pass another immigration law called the National Origins Act of 1924. They're going to lower the ceiling, lower the cap to 2%. And then they're also going to scale back the year they're using for the census, and they're going to use 1924 and 1890. And if you look at immigration maps, which I showed you in class, the difference between immigrants in 1890 to 1910 is the majority of immigrants in 1890 are coming from Western Europe. The majority of immigrants in 1910 are coming from Eastern Europe. So in the National Origins Act of 1924, if we push back the census year to 1890, that means we're pretty much eliminating all Eastern Europeans or Southern Europeans that are, you know, fueling this Red Scare from coming into the country. We also are going to pass or sign the gentleman's agreement. Teddy Roosevelt's going to sign this. He signed this earlier, but basically says we're not allowing any Japanese immigration into our country. We had signed in 1882 the Chinese Exclusion Act, which stopped all Chinese immigration into our country. So we had really very few immigrants coming from the Far East. We had very few immigrants coming from Southern and Eastern Europe. The majority of our immigrants coming into the 1920s is going to be from Western Europe and from Mexico, because we didn't put any restrictions on Western Hemisphere immigration. So we have a lot of people coming in from Latin America and Mexico due to a lot of the agricultural jobs in the West. So that's kind of what immigration looked like during the 1920s. We will see in the 1930s, for various reasons, and especially the 1940s, immigration is pretty much going to come to a halt. But we'll talk about that later. Just a little teaser of what's to come in the future. Let me go ahead and pull this up over here. And let me get here. I want to pull this screen back up again so we can move on. Scopes monkey trial, that was a major trial during this time, and we talked about that. That's when we're looking at the morality of the United States, and the debate with the Scopes monkey trial is, should schools be allowed to teach evolution? And it was a debate between evolution and creation, and the question of whether or not the Bible is inerrant, meaning if the Bible contains errors or not. Now, the fundamentalists said, no, it contains no errors, and they support the teaching of creation in school. Modernists said, well, there's a lot of gray areas in the Bible, and, you know, Darwinism could be one of those, so they want it taught in the school. Scopes monkey trial is going to come to a head where John Scopes is going to be a substitute teacher. He is going to be charged with teaching evolution in a Tennessee school where that was deemed illegal. It was a misdemeanor. It's going to result in a trial with the defense attorney of Clarence Darrow being supported by the ACLU, and you also have William Jennings Bryan on the prosecutorial side, and it's going to get all sorts of press all over the country, and it's going to result in Scopes being found guilty, but then later getting off on a technicality, so he didn't have to pay the fine. But it did elevate that debate to the national stage, which was the goal of the ACLU at this time. I'm going to pause here real quick, and just because someone had a question, Trinity asked, she wanted me just to touch base again on who is John J. Pershing. Trinity, Pershing had a couple roles in the United States in our history. Number one, he is the man who went down into Mexico when Pancho Villa was raiding across the border into New Mexico. John J. Pershing was sent down there in order to try to find him. He's not going to be successful. But that's going to put him on the map, and then he is going to lead the American Expeditionary Force that's going to go fight over in Europe during World War I. He's going to take 1 million men over there to fight on our behalf. So that's John J. Pershing. Hopefully that answers your question. Basically, any other questions you guys have real quick right now that I can go on? I'm kind of concerned because it doesn't look like the chat window is working the way I was hoping it would. I think with that, I might have to tweak that or tweak that a little bit. If you do by chance, before we move on, have the chat window available, can you type something in there so I can see if it's working? You might have to go over into Google Hangouts. If you go over to the far left, if you click on the screen there, I don't know if it works for you guys or not. There's a little chat box you can hit, and you might be able to get into it. But if not, that's okay. We'll just continue on. And if you have questions, you can text them to me via Remind. All right, so let's get back to the PowerPoint that I have here. Again, here's the immigration laws that I was talking about, the Emergency Quota Act and the Immigration Act of 1924. Make sure you know that. Okay, so Caitlin tells me the chat's not working, so I apologize for that, guys. So you're just going to have to fall back on texting if you have any questions. So, all right, let's talk a little bit about foreign policy of the 1920s. Now, we start with with Harding as the president. He is going to die in office, and Coolidge is going to come in. And Coolidge is going to introduce basically more laissez-faire politics. He says the business of America is business. We're going to go into a more of a neutral stand in America. We're not going to get involved in foreign entanglements, but we are definitely going to be involved in foreign affairs. And that's where I want to basically talk to you guys right now. You got stuck with my face again. Several key events that the United States takes place in during the 1920s. The first one is the Washington Naval Conference. At the Washington Naval Conference, we invited 9 countries to come over, and the whole purpose of the Washington Naval Conference was to basically prevent any future naval arms races, maybe look at some naval disarmament, and basically kind of get the world on an even keel so we don't have a superpower, if you will. Three major treaties came out of the Washington Naval Conference. You had the Four Powers Treaty, the Five Powers Treaty, and the Nine Powers Treaty. Now, the Four Powers Treaty was between England, the United States, Japan, and France. And what that one set up was a status quo in the Pacific realm. Basically, all 4 of these countries agreed that we're going to go ahead and slow down on imperialism. We're just going to go back to the way things were prior to World War I. So that's the Four Powers Treaty. The Five Powers Treaty is probably the most well-known treaty that was made. This was made between, again, the United States, Japan, Great Britain, France, and Italy. And what this did was it set up ratios for the size of navies. Each country, it was deemed what their naval use was going to require. And they set up a ratio of 5 to 3 to 1 ratio. And it was based on the total tonnage of ships being built or ships sailing in the fleets of each of these countries. Basically, the way it worked, and I'm just going to simplify it for you, for every 5 capital ships that the United States and Great Britain had, Japan was allowed 3. And then Italy and France were each allowed 1. So that's the 5 to 3 to 1 ratio. England and the United States were afforded more ships just because, for instance, in the United States, we have 2 coasts that we have to defend. And in doing that, we needed a larger navy. So that's the Washington Naval Conference. And that was created, that was overseen, that was run by the United States. The next one I want to talk to you about is the Dawes Plan. And what I really want to try to find, I want to see if I have a chart you can look at, because to understand the Dawes Plan, I think it's easier to understand it if you can see my flow chart. So let me pull that up real quick. If you give me half a second here, it's right down here. Let me get to it. Here we go. Current slide. Let me get over here. I'm going to share this screen with you so you can look at it. I mean, I know the chat's not working, but I do like it, makes it a lot easier to share my PowerPoint. All right, here we go. This is the Dawes Plan. Basically, let me skip through here. There we go, Dawes Plan. Now, don't get the Dawes Plan confused with the Dawes Act. What the Dawes Plan was, it was an attempt to help Germany and to help ourselves. The Allies, meaning France and England, owed the United States a lot of money. And we weren't getting paid back. We weren't getting paid back because they didn't have the money to pay us. They were still waiting for the war reparations to be paid to them by Germany. The problem is Germany is already in a mass depression, and they don't have the money to pay off the war reparations. And they're honestly not very happy about having to pay them, so they're probably not in a big hurry to pay them. What the United States does is we float a loan to Germany. We give them seed money. We give them about $2.5 billion in loans. What they're going to do is they're going to take that $2.5 billion. They're going to use $2 billion that they're going to send to the Allied countries. They're going to keep $500 million back to help them start rebuilding. The Allies can then do the same thing. They can take partial parts of that repayment from Germany and start paying back us the loans they owe us. So basically what we're doing as a country is we're putting money into circulation between us, Germany, and Western Europe in order for us to get paid back the money that's owed us. Now, a lot of people don't get confused when you look at this chart. It almost looks like that we're just giving Germany money that we're eventually going to get back and call it good. Germany still owes us this money. This is not something we're just giving to them for free. So what this leads to, honestly, is a lot of ill will from Germany towards the United States because they're in hock to us and they don't like being in hock to us. It's bad enough that they have to pay the war reparations. It's bad enough that they have to rebuild Europe after World War I when they didn't even start it. It's bad enough that their people are living in poverty with disease and starvation and all this other stuff. And now they owe the United States money. It should be no surprise to you, as miserable as life was in Germany, that it was really easy for a guy named Adolf Hitler to step in and say, hey, I'm going to save you. But again, that's on the next test. We're going to focus on this one. Finally, the last thing in the in the 1920s is going to be, with our foreign policy, is going to be the Kellogg-Briand Pact. And this was honestly an act of genius by Coolidge and the Secretary of State, Kellogg. Because what happened was France approached the United States and says, hey, we want to make a treaty with you guys. And we want a treaty that says we promise that we won't go to war with each other. On the surface, this sounds good. They're not asking us that much. Let's just promise you're not going to fight with us. The problem is, if we set this alliance up with France, then we're also beholden to France if someone else attacks them. It's not kind of like we're saying we got your back. And that's the last thing the United States wants. That's why we didn't join the League of Nations. We don't want to be involved in these foreign alliances. But Kellogg is in a position where he's like, well, if I don't accept this offer, that makes the United States look bad. That makes it look like we have a desire to go to war with France. And, you know, we really don't have that desire, but we also don't have a desire to be buddies with them either. So basically what we're going to suggest is through this pact is tell Briand, hey, if you go out, because he was a foreign minister, get other countries involved. If you can get every other country involved in the world to sign it, then we'll sign it too. And that way it looks like America's trying to maintain peace. We're not setting up a specific alliance with anybody. We're just all signing this pledge that we're not going to go to war with each other. And honestly, this pledge doesn't hold water. I told my class, it's a paper tiger. It looks great, but it has no power behind it. There is no way you can enforce it. But like I said, it gets us out of kind of a sticky situation with Great Britain or with France at this time. So anyway, all right, so I've gone through a lot of the stuff I'm talking about, or that's going to be on the test tomorrow. A few things that I should mention, make sure I talked about them today. Make sure you know about some of those fighting for civil rights in the 1920s, the Marcus Garveys, the Booker T. Washingtons, the W.E.B. Du Bois. Make sure you're familiar with them. Be familiar with the 20s and what's going on during that time. Imperialism, the big ideas. A lot of this test, guys, is big ideas. I'll be honest with you. There's a lot more 1920s on there than you might imagine. So we went through the 1920s pretty quick, but make sure you're familiar with them. What else can I tell you? Send me some, guys, buy me some time right now. If you have me, text me a question or something. I'm going to try to get in, and I'm going to try to see if I can get the chat working. I'm not sure if I can. I'm going to, if I cut you off, I'll come back, I promise. But I want to get into this. I want to look at something and see if I can set up this chat, because it's unfortunate that it's not working. What, did you send me something? Let me see. Caitlin sent me something, and apparently it's a picture. Oh, wait, what's this? Is this, okay, so there is a chat going on. I just can't see it. Is that what you're telling me? Is that my understanding? Let me try something else. I got a plan. I always got a plan. Let me go over here. Let me try this. No worries. Just talk amongst yourselves, or if you have a dog, play with your dog or something like that, and I'll play with Flynn here in just a minute. Let me get to this link here. Maybe I'll be able to see it this way. It's not going to do it. I wonder if I can just go straight into YouTube and get into my channel. I'm going to try to go through a different back route here and see if I can see what's going on. Let me get on here. Is it going to come? Ah, there we go. Okay, I can see it now. All right, so this is what we're going to do. Okay, we got questions. Any key battles we need to know besides the Battle of Somme? No, don't worry about it. Who was the person that went to Congress to request war? Caitlin, I'm assuming that you are referring to going to war against entering into World War One. And the answer to that is going to be Woodrow Wilson. He is going to request war from Congress. The president has the power to request war. Okay, what else? Yeah, I had to open up a whole nother window explorer here to see that. So now I know this doesn't work. So that's annoying. It should work, and that just ticks me off. Just when I thought I had a great plan. All right, what else? Any other questions you guys got? Because, like I said, I apologize I didn't see this chat sooner. Let me get live chat. Let me do that. Nothing. Okay. You guys got your review sheets. Oh, here's a question. What do you need to know about the Federal Reserve Act and the Clayton Antitrust Act? Absolutely nothing, Megan. That was on the last test. That was on the Gilded Age test and everything like that. So don't worry about that for this test. Basically, we're just looking at imperialism. We're looking at World War I, and we're looking at the culture of the 1920s and foreign policy of the 1920s. So don't worry about Federal Reserve and Clayton Antitrust. Okay. Okay. Can you repeat the names of the people involved in the civil rights you just said? I can do that. Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey is the one who starts the UNIA. Basically Marcus Garvey, you have W.E.B. Du Bois. He is the one who thought that they should, that African Americans should be treated equally just because they're Americans. And then finally, Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington wanted to take a slower approach. What he wanted to talk about was he's the one who said we got to earn the respect of white America before we could start getting the rights and stuff we wanted. So W.B. Du Bois, Booker T. Washington, and Marcus Garvey. Be familiar with those. I got a lot of questions coming now, so here we go. All right. Let me see. Mahir, you just sent me a question. Let me get to that one. You asked me to talk about the decline in tax prices in order for Americans to pay more taxes. That was Mellon's plan. That was his tax plan, and he was the Secretary of Treasury under Harding, under Coolidge, and we haven't talked about Hoover, but he's going to be the Secretary of Treasury under Hoover. And Mellon's plan was, if you decrease taxes, then eventually in the long run, you will collect more taxes. The whole idea, Mahir, if to understand that completely, or the most important thing you need to understand is basically understand that Mellon was cutting taxes in order to benefit business during the 1920s. Remember that Coolidge believed that the business of America was business, so he is going to do everything he can support. We're going back to laissez-faire politics, and he wants to infuse more money into the economy, and the way you can do that is give Americans more money because you're not taking it through tax dollars. But just understand that basically he was the tax cuts were there to help the business of America. Real quickly, Giovanni, you do have an SAQ. It will not be split. You're taking the multiple choice and the SAQ tomorrow. Justine asks, can I compare the different foreign policies? Justine, I'm assuming you're talking about the foreign policies between Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson during the 19-teens and 1900s. Basically, Teddy Roosevelt, is going to have the big stick diplomacy, which means he's going to use the military to protect and enforce U.S. interest in Latin America. With the Roosevelt corollary, he's going to use the military to protect our interest down there. The thing is, he's not afraid to use the Roosevelt corollary. He was not afraid to use the military to protect our interests. Now, when Taft comes in, he's going to introduce dollar diplomacy, and that's about using economics. He is going to encourage American businesses and American banks to use their wealth in Latin America to further our standing down there. If we're investing money down there, we have more interest in what's going on down there. We're willing to build more companies down there. and the Latin American countries are more willing to work with us because we're kind of putting our money where our mouth is. And then finally, Woodrow Wilson is going to introduce moral diplomacy. And what Woodrow Wilson wanted to introduce was he was all about spreading democracy. And remember, when we went into democracy, when he wanted to spread democracy into the world, I mean, that's why he said we went into World War I. We're going in to make the world safe for democracy. So he believed that going in and using the strength we had, maybe with our military at times, maybe with our money at times, but if we use that influence, we can go into Latin American countries and help spread democracy. Just to backtrack a little bit on that, Justine, one reason he wanted to do that was during the presidencies of Wilson, or of Taft and Roosevelt, we did see the rise of, some tyrannical governments who were pro-American, but you had dictators in some of these countries. So what Wilson's looking for is how can we supplant those dictators and put a democratic leader in those places? And that's what happened down in Mexico. When Huerta came in as the dictator of Mexico, we didn't like that. And so he found a way to get the military into Mexico. Huerta went out, took off and went to hide out in Europe, and we implanted a democratic president, Carranzo, and in doing so, that's what led to the Pancho Villa raids and everything like that. So moral diplomacy was all about spreading democracy. Let's see, what else? Go over the Battle of the Somme again. Basically, Ramesia, what that was the battle beginning of 1917. That's the battle where World War I had pretty much been fought to a stalemate, and the Allies decided to go on a full offensive. And what they're going to do is they're going to launch a huge battery of bombs and shells on the German trenches across no man's land. And I think I mentioned that they sent over 1.5 million artillery shells. And we're going to see, massive death, 20,000 killed in the first day, over 1 million killed in the course of the battle. It's going to be a 4-month-long battle. And what the Battle of the Somme shows us is the devastation of technology in this war, the machine gun and everything like that. And I think the phrase we talked about in class was the flower of Europe had been lost because of the Battle of the Somme. They had lost their innocence. The youth of Europe had been lost. If you think about it, World War I, the number of deaths that came out of that war, I mean, just France alone, 1/5 of the adult population, of the male adult population, had been killed during World War I. So, the Battle of the Somme just kind of encapsulated in a 4-month period the entirety of World War I and the losses that were suffered during that point. I'm looking to see if I have any more. Let's see, I have one more text. Jacob, you asked a question. Is the Washington Naval Conference a major thing you need to know? Be familiar with it, Jacob. Just know that, you don't necessarily need to know the 4, the 5, and the 9 power treaties. Just know that we were negotiating treaties, and we were negotiating with all these countries with the idea of maintaining a status quo across the country or across the world. We didn't want another arms race, which is one of the reasons that World War I started. So this was an action by the United States with these 8 other countries to prevent another arms race, to prevent a country from becoming too powerful, especially with their navies. And right there, that ties back to, the freedom of the seas and what we dealt with the unrestricted submarine warfare of the Germans during World War I. So that's what that was all about, okay? Anything else, guys? I'm looking here, and nothing else seems to be coming up. Those are good questions. I'm sorry I missed these earlier, but yeah, okay. I'm not seeing anything else. No more texts are coming in. I think I've covered them all. Fantastic. All right, so we got through it. It seems like, man, we just did this a couple weeks ago, and believe it or not, we're going to do this in a couple more weeks when we get through the Great Depression and World War II. But I really think that you'll find this test manageable tomorrow. Like I said, it's 32 multiple choice questions. You are going to do a short answer question at the same time. So this is going to be all in one setting. So you guys are going to have to be pretty efficient. We've got to get more efficient with some of the stuff we're doing with our test taking strategies. So you should be able to get it all done tomorrow. Again, like always, I'll have it all ready for you to go. I'm not going to be available in the morning unless you come in before 8 o'clock, because tomorrow morning is the FCA meeting in my room. That starts at 8. You're welcome to join us for that. Otherwise, if you get in before 8, I can answer any questions you have. Let's see. Is there any synthesis for the 1920 to any other? Oh, yeah, synthesis. Basically, Giovanni, 1950s. But you don't have to worry about it on this test. Don't worry about any synthesis for this. But in the future, absolutely. The 1920s, you can synthesize the Red Scare. You can synthesize new technology coming in. You can synthesize, the role of the woman in the house and stuff like that. There's just so much between those two. But you necessarily don't have to. You don't worry about it for this test. In fact, don't forget everything I just said. It's not going to be on this test. So. All right. Anything else you guys want? Anything else you guys need? I want to get back to this screen because I'm jumping back and forth. Let me get back over here to this one. And you on the watch page, that's what I want to see. Oh, look at that. I just figured out how I can do this in the future. Dang. All right, cool. So you learn things every time. All right. That's how it works. Good deal. Okay, anything else, guys? All right. I can try to get Flynn over here. I can't guarantee that I'll get Flynn over here, but let me give it a shot. Hey, Flynn, come here a minute. Come here. Come here. You got to get up on the screen. People need to see you. Come here. Come on, get up here. Come here. Come here. Oh, he was sleeping. He was tired. Come on. Ready? Up we go. All right, here we go. Here's Flynn. He's got his ball. He's ready to play. Say, be nice, be nice. See, Flynn doesn't. I got this pad down there. He doesn't like jumping up there. Go get the ball. All right, there you go, guys. I hope you have a fantastic evening. I'll be up for a little while longer. If you need any questions, you can ask, and I'll be here for you. But other than that, I'm going to sign off now and just tell you, go study. Use your study guide. This is the key to passing the test. Everything you need to know, it's on the study guide. It's going to be on the test. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else I didn't talk about. Oh, I didn't talk about the KKK, but why should we give them any extra airtime? We know how bad they were. So just be familiar with the rise of the KKK during the 1920s. Okay. Anything else? I'm just I'm dragging it just to see if you guys have any more questions. All right. That's it. I'm going to say we're done. We're going to say good night. Have a fantastic evening, and we will see you tomorrow morning. Bye-bye.